Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sincerely Agile with Mary. Now, if you're joining us for the first time, this is the show where we promote the lean agile mindset, where we learn, unlearn, and relearn. And of course, it's a place where we want to be awesome and wholesome together. Today, we're looking at succession planning. Now, why is this an important topic? Well, I have just the woman to come and tell you all about it. I'm going to invite Rochelle Clarke to the screen. Hello, Rochelle, are you there? I can see you. There you go.
Hi, Mary. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. You might need to touch your camera a bit. It's a little blurry. Okay, it's sort of going in and out, kind of. Okay, that looks better. That looks better. That looks better.
Okay, excellent.
How are you? How are
Excellent.
you doing?
I'm doing really well.
Oh, I've lost you again, Rochelle. Technology problems. Hmm.
You.
Rochelle, are you there? I can still see myself. I can see you, but you are frozen.
Mary, are you there?
There you go. There you go.
Excellent.
There you go. Very good. Nice to have you on the show. Welcome to Sincerely Agile with Mary. Rochelle, it's so great to have you here. Now, I'm always excited because we've had such amazing guests on this show. I'm even more excited today because I got my approval to go live on LinkedIn yesterday. So you are essentially debuting it with me on LinkedIn today. So it's a super duper day for me to be streaming live on LinkedIn as well. I mean, I had like 6 to 7 applications before it got approved. So you can imagine how excited I am.
Congratulations to you and your resilience in terms of, being persistent.
I'm not one to give up that easily. Trust me, I'm not one to give up easily. Now, we have some people joining us already. Let's see where they're joining us from. I have Temi Tope from Nigeria, Victoria from Kent. I've got Ronke. Hello, Ronke. How are you? Ronke is joining us on LinkedIn. That is fantastic. And Stella Da Silva from Oman. Hello, Stella. How are you? Yes, thank you very much, Stella. I mean, I really need to throw a party for this, right? It took me about 7 applications. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you. And thank you for joining us. And that's Kemi from Lagos. Thank you. Now, let me introduce our guest to you. I'm just going to read her bio very quickly. Now, Rochelle is the founder and managing director of Succession Strength, a company that keeps businesses in business with business continuity and business transition planning. As a service, Succession Strength provides business continuity plans that protect business operations and growth from unplanned disruptions. With her company's advice, outgoing leaders, their incoming successors, and the business that support them are ready to transition successfully to the next stage of their business life cycle via succession or sale. Rochelle is an alumni of great institutions like the Wharton School, INSEAD, and Harvard Business School. Rochelle, you are welcome to the show. You're welcome to Sincerely Agile with Mary.
Mary, thank you so much for having me. It truly is an honor to be here and to be debuting your LinkedIn Live feed.
Tell me about it. Now, how have you been the last 18 months? It's been,
Yeah,
what has it been like for you?
The last 18 months have been really interesting, I think, for me and for everyone. I think the biggest impact is the reduction in travel, of course, because for myself, I tend to split time between the US and Europe. But because of the pandemic, I was more or less grounded in Europe. So it was more of shifting to work remotely, shifting to work online. But I have to say that it's something that even my clients have made a shift towards, and we've been able to manage. So I'm quite fortunate from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And it just goes to show how adaptable we are as human beings, isn't it?
Indeed.
I mean, I just like you, I traveled a lot. I live in Kent in the United Kingdom, and I've worked in Norway, I've worked in Brussels, and I traveled practically every week back and forth between, the UK and Brussels. And it was a job I loved so much. I mean, often went to Rotterdam. I was in Amsterdam for the same organization. But I tell you, when we went into this pandemic situation and we really all had to work from home, I was like, whoa, I was on the move a lot. You just don't realize how
You
much you
don't.
were giving of your time in commuting, isn't it?
You don't. You absolutely don't. Until you really have to shift, then you realize, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
it's incredible.
It is incredible. It is incredible. So I miss the human contact, but I don't miss the travel that much because, when you say you're a consultant and you travel a lot for work, it sounds very glamorous, and I guess it is, but it can get tiring also, isn't it?
It definitely can. It definitely
Yeah.
can. I do remember my days as a management consultant when you're 4 days of the week you're on the road and you really miss a lot in terms of interactions with family, with friends. And then when you're back home on the weekend, you're really trying to get as much done in a condensed amount of time. And it just feels like your life is in a perpetual rush,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is a little bit of a breather.
Yeah.
I am curious to see how things will play out in the long run, though. The fact that we have now gotten used to working remotely, I wonder just how much of that will remain and how much of a hybrid work environment we'll be exposed to. I'm curious
Absolutely.
to see.
I am curious also, but I think it's going to be something like 60-40, 50-50, or you know what? Work from home whenever you like. We have a choice. And I think organizations also are cashing in from, not having to probably spend so much on real estate. What do you think about that?
Yeah, quite possibly. Quite possibly. I definitely see that coming. I definitely see that
Mm,
happening.
yeah, yeah. Okay, our topic today, succession planning.
Yep.
Very, very important. And you will soon see why, because we've got the professional in this area to tell us all about it. All about it. Now, you're the MD of Succession Strength. Now, this is a company that is, helping organizations with their succession planning and their transition planning. Now,
Mhm.
the word generation of leadership, that caught my attention.
Uh-huh.
From one generation of leadership to the next, that caught my attention because I got this data off of Google.
Mhm.
Right now, when we talk about workforce, we have what, about 5 generations in the workforce right now?
Yes.
The traditionalists, the baby boomers, the Generation X, which is my bracket, that is where I belong, the millennials, and the Generation Z.
Yeah.
This is coming from HR Exchange Network. Now, when you have this mix of, generations in a workforce, and we're talking about succession planning and, transition planning, I wonder how you work with these different generations of people because their mindset could be totally different, their outlook to work and life totally different. So it would be interesting to, have your view on that. What do you say to that?
Oh, Mary, I think we can dedicate the entire show to something like this. To be quite honest, I was just in the US. I just got back from a conference in Texas where this was one of the topics that we were discussing, succession planning from the perspective of the different generations. And it's very interesting because what you find, if yes, there are 5 generations currently within the workforce, but there are 4 generations that are decision makers within the workforce. You see, traditionalists, baby boomers, millennials, and Gen X are the ones who are in decision-making roles within the workforce. This has a major impact. And the reason that this has a major impact and the reason that it gives pause is because even prior to the pandemic, there was a major disruption that was on the horizon that was being spoken about. That major disruption was on the horizon just because of the anticipated impact that it would have on the entire workforce across the globe. The name of that impact was the silver tsunami. I don't know if you've heard of it. The
First time.
silver tsunami in reference to the sheer number of baby boomers that was slated to retire over the next 10 years or so. And this survey, I think, came out back in 2013.
Right.
So it was anticipated that the impact of the sheer number of the retirements on the workforce was just going to be absolutely massive, right? And disruption, there was going to be just a mass disruption because of that.
Right.
Now, because of the fact that the pandemic was on the front pages of every single newspaper for the last year and a half, does not slow down the fact that this silver tsunami has been in progress and continues to be in progress. What that means is that we have had traditionalists and we have had baby boomers slated to retire. Many of us know of baby boomers who are retiring, are in the process of retiring, are thinking about retiring, or maybe should have retired but have not yet retired, right? Especially in the case of family-owned businesses. Many of us know of that scenario. What we're finding, however, is that many baby boomers are holding on a little bit longer than they should. And we have members of the younger generation, so Gen X and millennials, who are exiting the workforce a lot earlier than they should. Right? What we're seeing is that for traditionalists and for baby boomers, the focus has been on work. There has been a huge importance on work, and it's more or less working to live. Their identities have been wrapped up in being the company man or the company woman, right? Their identities have been wrapped up in the work that they do. Right? So you can't imagine just how difficult it would be to extricate themselves from this thing that gave them their identity basically for the entirety of their lives.
Right.
Many of them have not planned for that next step. So they're ill-equipped to make that next step. As a result, they hold on, right, to what they know and what they have come to love. On the other hand, if you're talking generations, the mindset has completely shifted. When you're talking Gen X and when you're talking millennials, they're shifting from focusing more on work to focusing more on other things, right? So while the baby boomers ushered in the 60-hour work week, Gen X and the millennials are more on a work-life balance thing, right? We're not even going to talk about Gen Zs because you're seeing the rise of the gig economy.
Absolutely.
Right? So this large this affinity to work, this affinity to a job, this you know, the amount of effort that it has taken for someone to really hold on to a job that they're having, this loyalty that they had to one employer, basically is flittering away, and it's going out of the window when you're speaking Gen X and millennials. As a result of that, many of them with this new mindset are taking the opinion that, you know what, I'll just go find another job. Or in many cases, I'll just take some time off. I'll take a sabbatical, right? So for all intents and purposes, they are exiting the workforce much earlier than traditionally they should.
Absolutely.
So the question, Mary, ultimately is, well, what's the difference between one of the Gen Xers or millennials who leaves the workforce earlier than they should and a baby boomer who retires? If you're talking about from the perspective of a company and their succession planning and their long-term purview, the effect is essentially the same. You have had someone whom you've invested in for quite some time, whom you were hoping would carry on this business, that's no longer there. So you now have an empty seat that needs to be filled.
Now, that's a huge challenge, right?
Huge.
For organizations, because even for the ones exiting very quickly, it's either they're exiting or they're changing jobs very quickly. I mean, organizations like Google, I mean, you hear this is a great place to work, but guess what? The churn rate is about what, 2-3 years?
Absolutely.
You would think that because Google is such a great place to work, people stay there for 30 years. No, they move very quickly.
Very quickly.
Given this challenge, I mean, what should such organizations with a high churn of, young people leaving quickly, what should their, strategy be? But before you answer that, let me just quickly bring this question to you so that for those joining us, we're talking succession and business succession planning here. How would you define that? And then we'll go back to that. How would you define or describe business succession planning?
Absolutely. So succession planning encompasses all of the actions to prepare incoming leaders and their organizations to replace outgoing leaders when they retire, leave the business, or unfortunately, in some cases, pass away prematurely. Right? It really is more than just putting butts in empty seats.
Mm-hmm.
That is referred to as replacement planning,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right?
Okay.
So succession planning has a whole lot wrapped up into it. There's a huge change management element that also cannot be overlooked when it comes to the organization's ability to absorb a change like this.
Absolutely. Change management, and that takes us back to the issue of the different generations we have on within our organizations today. So this is a huge challenge for organizations. You're investing in people, you're thinking, oh, they're going to be there for the next 10, 20 years, but in 2, 3 years, they're gone.
Yes,
What's the strategy to deal with this?
flexibility.
Okay.
Flexibility and the ability to not just do succession planning from a generationally linear perspective. In the past, succession planning was done for senior positions within the business. Oh, Bob is nearing retirement, so we will plan for his succession. It's about shaking at any time in any key position can leave the business,
Right.
right? So you need to be looking layers down, right? That millennial who sits down the hall, right, who is also a key decision maker, can also leave the business. So what is the plan for their succession in the event that they leave? Because
Mm.
their impact on the business may be just as devastating.
Mm-hmm. And
So
you talk about key decision makers.
mhm,
So the millennial, based on the fact that we're talking about a knowledge economy, it's not
mhm.
just about all the decisions being made at the top now. So
No,
if they're key decision makers, then you really need to get your strategy right.
absolutely, absolutely. And the key decision makers that we see around the table are indeed from those four generations.
Mm-hmm.
Well, traditionalists, well, they're kind of churning out of the workforce now. Baby boomers, for sure. We're seeing Gen X, and we are seeing millennials who are also in key decision making roles.
Yeah.
If you're talking about service oriented firms, and for this, I've spoken with a number of if it's accounting firms or legal firms where partnership used to be the holy grail of your existence in that
Yeah.
firm. What the issue that those firms are finding right now is that many successors are opting out of the partnership track,
Mm-hmm.
right? They know
Yeah.
that it's not of interest to them,
Right.
right? That mindset that I was speaking about, Mary,
Yeah.
many of
Yeah.
them are saying, well, I know what it is to become a partner.
Yeah.
It will have such an impact on my personal life that it's just not something that I'm willing to consider,
Exactly.
right?
Exactly.
So as a result of this, you're finding firms with a chasm when it
Mm-hmm.
comes to their talent,
Mm-hmm.
right? Folks leaving and folks leaving a little bit earlier than they should, and folks holding on a little bit longer than they should. So the question
Yeah.
is, it's really a conundrum. What do we
Yeah, it
do
is.
in that case?
What do we do? So, what have you found that most organizations are doing, given that is what you do?
Yeah, flexibility,
Okay.
flexibility, and doing succession planning for more than just the senior levels. Who
Okay.
else within the organization has a key decision making role? And do we have a backup plan for them? Are we grooming others to take over in the event that they do leave?
Mm. Yeah,
Right?
but from what you're saying, it looks like we have to have the backup of the backup of the backup.
Yes, but one thing I do need to touch on, Mary, and
Yeah.
maybe we'll speak about this a little bit later on as well. The approach to succession planning, and everyone will say, if I say, when you're thinking about a successor moving in to take over someone's role, you look for capability. Everyone will roll their eyes and say, yes, yes, of course, you will look for someone who's capable and who has the skills. The other thing that we evaluate is commitment.
Okay.
Commitment and capability. Commitment and capability. When it comes to successors, primarily in a business, yes, they need to be capable, but are they committed? Right? And there are little things that we look for to determine whether or not they are committed. Because when the rubber hits the road,
Mhm.
you need to ensure that there's something that will keep them there.
Mhm.
Right? The balance of power has shifted. We were speaking generations before. Well, if you look at the number of baby boomers who are slated to leave the workforce, if all of them were to leave, there will not be enough Gen X's and millennials to fill the roles that they have left.
Wow.
Yes, of course, we're talking about, perhaps making things more digital, but ultimately, the number of seats that will be vacated by
Mhm.
retiring baby
Mhm.
boomers will not
Mhm.
be filled by the number of Gen X's and
Wow.
millennials that we have. So the balance of power has shifted. The
Wow.
younger generations now have options, which is why it's a little bit easier for them to make that shift and make that jump
Mhm.
if their conditions are not right where they are.
That's it. If the conditions are not right, they're moving.
Yes, they
They're moving.
absolutely are. And they can.
And they can move. And after all, it is a knowledge economy and they are needed somewhere else. I mean, there will be
Yes,
somewhere else to absorb them. So for them, leaving a job, even when they don't even have the security of another job, they are sure they will get something in no time. I mean,
absolutely.
that's the reality of the workforce today. And like you said, organizations then need to be flexible to work with what they have. Now, talking about capability and all of that, I'm asking, is business succession planning the same as business transition planning, or is there an overlap there? Because obviously you need some kind of strategy, and I think that comes in the transition planning. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question that you ask. Now, if you think of business transition planning as an umbrella,
Yeah.
business transition planning is the umbrella.
Right.
Underneath this umbrella is succession planning, which is the replacement of one set of leadership to another within an organization, right? But then there are also other types of exit planning, which could include selling the business. If you're selling the
Right.
business from one set of owners to the next set of owners, that is also considered a business transition, right?
Right.
So all of the different types of exits, whether it's
Mhm.
via succession or via sale, fall under the umbrella of a business transition.
What about changing a business portfolio? Does that come under transition?
Changing the business portfolio in what way?
In the type of business that an organization engages in.
Oh, not necessarily, unless there's a change in leadership as well. But
Okay.
then that may be considered an internal change. Maybe there's a new line of business that's stood
Okay.
up within the same organization, which is noble and which is good, but that may be considered succession planning if you're thinking about the long term and that changeover of leadership.
Okay. So, given that this is what you do for the most part every day, all day, every day, which sector would you say, or should I say, if we look at big businesses and if we look at, say, SMEs, how
Mhm.
well are they faring in their spaces with regards to this subject? So, what's happening in the SME space, for example? Are they doing okay? Are they doing worse? Are the big organizations doing much better when it comes to this subject?
Yeah. So just by the nature of their makeup,
Mhm.
SMEs are more vulnerable when it comes to succession planning. And this is for a
Right.
number of reasons.
Right.
A, their
Mhm.
ability to attract talent. B, the size of their organization may not allow for that bench strength that a major organization may have. Right? So it's for a number of reasons that smaller businesses tend to be more vulnerable when it comes to planning for a succession. And
Mm.
it just really comes down to their size.
Yeah, it comes down to size. It comes down to probably, like you said, bench strength, and
Yep.
bench strength needs to be funded, right? So, but sometimes do you also find that maybe SMEs are holding on to funding that they could otherwise be using in terms of looking far ahead?
So here is the thing, and this is a distinction that I need to make between family-owned businesses that we work
Yeah.
with and non-family-owned businesses.
Okay.
You see, family-owned businesses tend to, for the most part, have a longer-term purview than non-family-owned businesses. Many of them are in it for the long run. As a result of this, statistically, they tend to be more conservative when it comes to the expenditure of their resources,
Right.
right? They tend to be a little bit slower when it comes to taking on new innovations,
Mm-hmm.
making major investments. And this is actually something that has helped them to exist for the long term, just slow and steady approach to,
Okay.
not making major shifts.
Mm-hmm.
So this has helped them in the long term. For non-family owned businesses, however, without that long-term purview and perspective, if it is that they're holding back the investment for reasons that are not along those lines, then the question becomes, well, what is it that you're trying to achieve?
Exactly.
Right? Is there a fear in terms of investing in areas
Mm-hmm.
of growth for the business? And if there is that fear, what does it stem from? Right?
Absolutely.
And what is the mission? What is your mission? And what are you trying to accomplish as a business?
That's the business.
Right? Because businesses do need investment in order to grow, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
different mindset if you're a family owned business who is taking a conservative approach to that growth.
Yeah, but is it possible that that conservative approach could also work against you? Because
In some,
we
mhm.
have seen family businesses where they didn't really spend in terms of bringing in new idea, new people in terms of bench strength, and these children that they were hoping would take over are not interested. What then happens?
Absolutely. And you've hit the nail on the head, Mary. There are a lot of cases, and there are a lot of cases where family-owned businesses have relied on the fact,
Mhm.
erroneously relied on the fact that they thought that younger members of the family would be interested in taking over, right? In many cases, this is far from the intention of that younger member of the family.
Mhm.
Right. And in some cases, just as you're saying, one of the areas of conflict that we see in family owned businesses is the fact that the younger generation wants to innovate. They want to bring new things to the table. But the older generation is saying, whoa, 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 whoa. Let's take this slow and easy. Perhaps this is not something that we want to bring on board at the moment. And that frustration, that friction, in some cases causes members of the younger generation to eventually get frustrated and perhaps exit the business.
Mhm.
Right. So we do acknowledge the fact that this is an area, this can be an area of contention
Mhm.
that may result in folks leaving the business. We also
Absolutely.
acknowledge the fact that in many cases, we recognize that family owned businesses may be a little bit slower to the game when it comes to many innovations. Right. But you need to remember the mindset that they have is whoever is in charge of the business, they are a custodian of the business for that generation.
That's right.
And in many instances, they don't want to mess things up for the generations that are to come. Right. So their mindset at the time is, yes, I hear that this is the next big thing, but I don't want to bet the farm on this until I know that it's somewhat proven.
Absolutely.
Right. So this is where we can kind of understand the mindset, but then there is still the need for some sort of innovation. So then the question becomes, okay, you don't want to bet the whole farm, but certainly you can allocate some funding to ensuring that some innovations are being tried out, are being experimented upon to ensure that the business still has legs to stand on. And in many of the successful family business scenarios, we do have instances where members of the younger generation run those parallels that are the innovation parallels, which
Yeah, I was
end
just
up
going to
in
say, where do you find the middle ground to say, you know what, we don't want to become a dinosaur, but
yeah,
how can we find that space to innovate?
exactly. So in many cases, we've seen where the members of the younger generation are put in charge of these parallels,
Right.
right? And as the older generation exits the business, in many cases, you see where that parallel becomes the core business. Right. And that is how the family business succeeds for generations, not by being
Absolutely.
stuck in one
Hmm.
mindset or way of thinking, but by having the courage to branch out
An
cautiously
experiment.
still and experiment
Yeah.
in a way that is still beneficial for the business.
Yeah, and safe, of course. And then they can learn and inspect and adapt, like we say. And then if it is worthwhile, for more investment, then they go ahead and do that.
Precisely.
Stella says some leaders also don't want to let go of their authority and power and thus ignore succession planning. Absolutely. I
Yes.
think we see that a lot, but
Yes.
to the detriment of the organization. Do you see this a lot,
A lot. And a
Rochelle?
lot of it comes down to identity, Mary, as I
Mm,
mentioned. That's a really good point, Stella. And it comes down to identity. Remember what I said. In instances like this, particularly if it's a family business scenario where, the dad or mom doesn't want to let go and I'm being strangled in this role, what we say is, okay, try to put yourself in the shoes of that outgoing leader.
mm,
This has been what they've done for their entire life. Right? Their work has become their life. This is their complete identity. They don't know who they are outside of work.
mm,
In many cases, I think in Latin America, I think there's the saying that basically says, well, we work until we can't walk.
mm.
Right? Whereas this is it. This is the business. If I don't do this, what do I do? Right? In those cases, the work that we do with outgoing leaders is essentially that, figuring out what can you be passionate about outside of the business,
Mm.
and how do you move into that, right, in a gradual way, so that it does not have a major impact on the business itself, but so that you feel comfortable letting go of the business when that time comes.
Yeah,
Right. But it needs to
yeah.
be there definitely needs to be some planning that goes
Hmm.
along with this, and some forethought. that goes along with this.
And you have to touch on the mindset without a doubt. One needs to help them to see things differently, to say, you know
Yes.
what, if you really love this business, then you need to start listening and looking outward, so that the business actually transcends, the next generation. And Kemi is saying here, succession planning should be an ongoing thing regularly in any organization. Actually, it should be part of how things are done around here, right?
Standard business strategy.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's more than just having a plan. It's really working the plan. Is the plan
Yeah.
even documented in many cases?
That's it. Is it documented? Is it documented? I mean, how can we create a learning organization? That is also part of the plan, right? How can we create a learning organization so that as people exit, we have things documented, right? We have things
Absolutely.
documented.
There's that knowledge transfer.
Knowledge transfer, absolutely. Some leaders view succession planning as a threat to their leadership. Well, that happens every day. And this is why I work as an agilist, Stella, as you know. And this is part of the shift in mindset that we're trying to help leadership understand. And we have seen organizations fail woefully because of this.
Yeah,
Woefully.
absolutely.
We have seen organizations where, they have not created succession planning. They have not created, avenues for clear communication channels, and their competitors have taken over overnight because the environment within which their people are working is just not safe enough. I mean, that mindset needs to shift, and this is what we try to promote in an agile environment. Not just any not just agile environment, any environment. That should be the norm, like Kemi just said. It should be part of the culture today. It should be part of how things are done around here, because if you don't, I mean, you stand to lose as an organization, isn't it? You stand to lose.
Absolutely.
For example, in an agile space, when we talk about giving autonomy to people working for you, as a manager, you might feel threatened initially. But this is what we then do. We coach you into your new role to say, you know what, you should now be a coach. You should be a facilitator. You should be a leader, helping them grow, creating an environment in which they can thrive. So it all starts with the mindset. It all starts with the mindset. Let's see what our audience
But Mary, I love
Yeah.
what you say, Mary, because essentially what you're doing is creating this passion, right? You're creating a passion in terms of what the next step looks like.
Yes.
Right. So they feel as though they have purpose making that next step,
Absolutely.
A strong sense of purpose.
Absolutely. Because you have already created that environment. That is the culture.
Yeah.
That is the culture. So there's no need for any leader to feel threatened. There's no need for any, person within the organization to feel, what, if I have great ideas about innovation, I will feel comfortable to speak about it. I will have, or should I say, I will be given the opportunity to innovate. And that is what you want for your organization, especially in a knowledge economy, right? Things are moving faster than any one person can keep up. So gone are the days when we all looked up to the leader as the hero who had all the answers. Not again. I mean, that can't continue to happen. That can't even happen now because no one person has the answer. Interesting stuff, right? Just trying to look for the next question to ask you. I have a few here, but let's see. Okay. Is there, I mean, we've touched on this. Is there a particular value system that facilitates a mindset that is proactive to this way of thinking? I mean, we've sort of danced around.
Yes, we've danced around this. I mean, when it comes to mindset, in addition to what we would have mentioned before, leaders need to have this mindset of longevity.
Yeah.
Right? Longevity and to some degree risk aversion, because it really is about protecting the operations of the business in the event that something were to happen. Right? So in this way, you're really protecting and preparing yourself to manage the business's future. So those are two other things that I would add to the values that we would have mentioned before.
Right. Good. So what pitfalls have you seen business owners experience as a result of a lack of succession/transition planning?
Okay. So this is actually a good one. So what we've seen is that owners who fail to plan for a succession or a business transition, they can really find themselves in an unfortunate position where the continuity of the business is put in jeopardy. Right? For example, in the succession scenario, if a key employee decides to leave prematurely, we have a business that's really unable to maintain a normal level of performance, right? And I think everyone can have can give an example of of a scenario where something like that has happened. If, on the other hand, the transition that you're thinking about is a sale, well, if you fail to prepare for selling this business, if you're failing to prepare to sell this business, then what you're doing ultimately is perhaps leaving money on the table, right? Because if the business even ends up selling, because what you find is that I think statistically, just 20% of businesses that go up for sale end up being sold. And this is due to the fact that they're just not prepared for sale, right? A business that's getting ready to be sold needs solid preparation, a solid number of years to prepare itself so that it is attractive enough for potential buyers, right? So businesses that don't prepare for transitions are really shooting themselves in the foot, and they stand to not gain as much value as they would have created or built up in their operations.
And probably not even sell well because they haven't prepared well at all. So it is important that that is also in the picture. Are we planning to sell in so many years, down the line or not? And if we are, what steps should we be taking, right?
And Mary, one of the things that we always say is that every business should be ready to sell. Every business should be sale ready. What that means is that you're running your business like a business, right? Your accounts are in order. Your business is professional enough. Because what if somebody came to you with that multi-million-dollar offer for your business out of the blue, right? One of the things that they are going to require is they're going to do their due diligence.
Yeah.
Right? You are in a much better position if you know that your business is fully prepared for whatever may come. Right? So if you're running your business, run your business like a business, because you truly never know. And we do have instances where business owners have just been approached by someone who wants to buy them out.
Absolutely.
Those that are prepared, of course, are the ones that end up selling and winning, in this exit scenario. So that's what we say. Always be prepared, because you never know.
So run your business like you're actually running it to sell it.
Yep.
That is the advice.
That's when you're maximizing value.
Right.
That is when you're maximizing value.
And we see a lot of that with fintechs,
Yes.
the digital space. You hear about, some, technology company coming up, and before you say Jack Robinson, it's been taken over, and, all these young guys have cashed in. So I guess that's what's happening in the fintech space, yeah? In the digital space.
Yep. But you have to give the buyer something enticing, yeah? When they look behind the curtain, they need to be excited. So
you have to. And again, I think you've touched on this. What should we start doing differently to involve the next generation in the affairs of small family business, especially? Because we've talked about, different generations. So maybe I'm the daughter of a farmer or the son of a farmer, but I don't want to be a farmer. I don't want to take over a farm. What else can we do, at least to keep the money, if nothing else, in the family? How should we start thinking differently to involve the next generation in our current businesses?
Well, I would answer this in two ways, and I will start with the second way and then pop back up to the first. What I would say is that being an owner doesn't mean that you're a manager of the business. They're two completely different hats. Right. So I think we need to divorce ourselves from this fact that, once you own the business, it means that you have to run it or work in it day after day. Right. You can train up the next generation to be a responsible owner of the business without them having to manage the business. Completely different mindsets. Now, in the first generation, you have an owner who's actually the operator of the business. That's understandable. But recognize that those who are coming to fill his or her shoes may not have all of the skills to both own and manage the business, but they don't necessarily need to. If they own the business, you can train them to manage those who are managing the business.
Right.
If they're working in the business as a manager, right, it's about showing them how they can best report to those who own the business, because in many cases, even family-owned scenarios, you may have someone from the business working in the business, but actually have no equity in the business. So they're actually not an owner on paper, right? And this is something, these two mindsets, I think, need to be divorced from each other. Not because your name is on the building means that you are an owner of the business. Just know that, right? And not because you own the business means that you need to work in the business.
Right.
right? So I'll start off by saying that. The next is when we advise clients preparing for a transition, we look at two things, as I mentioned, capability and commitment, particularly in the succession scenario and most definitely in the family business scenario, right? As I mentioned, capability is usually a foregone conclusion. You want a successor with the right skills, right? No one's going to argue with that, of
Yeah.
course, right? But what keeps that person in the role when times get tough is their level of commitment. So when we work with successors as a part of our successor due diligence process, we also evaluate the characteristics that could impact their commitment. First and foremost, are they even interested in this role?
Hmm.
I think this is a major conversation that many
Yeah.
completely overlook,
Yeah.
right? Have you had the conversation? Has the successor explicitly said, I used to give this example, but I think it still stands. You know, back in the day when we used to fly, if you're sitting in the exit row, the flight attendant asks, are you willing and able to assist in the event of an emergency?
Yep.
Those sitting in the exit row needed to give a verbal yes, right? They would say, sir, ma'am, I need a verbal yes from you before I can proceed,
Absolutely.
right? They needed to give a verbal yes. Well, it's very much the same scenario here.
Mm-hmm.
Has that successor given a verbal yes to the fact that they want to take over the business? Or is it that mommy or daddy assumes that Junior or Joanna wants to take over the business? Because there are many unhappy folks who have assumed incorrectly, right? And found out later on that their plans needed to shift drastically, and maybe they didn't have time to change. So that's number one.
Hmm.
Is the successor interested in taking over this role? And secondly, is there anything now that would prevent them from being committed to this role? It can be other family obligations. It can be conflicting personal interests. So maybe Junior wants to open up, I
A
don't know,
nightclub.
right? Or surf shack on the beach. Well, that's fantastic, Junior, but I need somebody to run this factory. These are things that you really need to know. And thirdly, I don't think we can state this. Also, the mental health of that person, right? Are they in a place where they can take on a responsibility like this? So these are some of the areas that we really look for that help us to determine whether or not they are capable of being committed to this
Hmm.
role at this current time. Of course,
Hmm.
things happen eventually, as time progresses, but at least going into the role, they need to have that baseline level of commitment. So those are the two things. It's their interest and
Yeah.
commitment.
Yeah. And what I also hear is that this we can't afford for this to be an emotional decision. It must be a strategic one, right?
Absolutely.
It has to be a strategic one because it's an emotional decision when you're thinking, oh, Junior is going to take over, Juliana is going to take over. Of course, they are going to take over because, after all, this is a family business. If they, what else will they be doing if they don't take over? So we need to get to the round table and have these discussions and have them early enough so that
Absolutely.
you can begin to put the right plans in place to for the longevity of that business. But we find that, like you said, people make a lot of emotional instead of
Mhm.
strategic decisions.
And guilt and shame are not the strategy that you want to employ here.
No,
So
it's
it's
not.
not the fact where mom or dad says, yes, but this business has provided so much for you, how can you? Absolutely
Exactly.
not. Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What is most important is to understand the mission of the business. What is it that we are trying to accomplish?
Mm-hmm.
That is usually our starting point in terms of
Mm-hmm.
working with businesses. Is it that you want this business to continue to provide for the family? If
Mm-hmm.
the answer is yes, recognize that doesn't necessarily mean that a family member may be capable or may even be the best person
Mm-hmm.
to guide the business to achieve that objective,
Right.
right? So understand what you're trying to achieve before we can then make the decision around what your options are. But be
Mm.
realistic and very clear on what you're trying to achieve.
What you're trying to achieve, absolutely. Ronke here says challenge for family-owned business is identifying who they can pass on the business to when children are not interested. And sometimes, Ronke, just like Rochelle is saying, they're not having this conversation early enough. Right,
That's the
Rochelle?
thing.
So by the time they find out that
That is the
Junior
thing.
is not interested, it becomes a struggle and it
Because
becomes a last minute thing.
Because, and you're absolutely right, Mary. In many cases, what you find is that, remember this identity thing that we were speaking about, generational
Mm,
identity, where they've held on for so long. But
yeah,
guess what? They get to the point where, as an outgoing leader, they're just exhausted and they
yeah,
can't do it anymore. So what
exactly.
happens? They look for the next warm body to kind of toss the business to.
Mm,
That is not, and you know, in many cases, it ends up being a family member because there's that implicit trust there, right? And then there's the fact that, oh, well, Junior has been around enough. He can figure it out. He knows the business well enough. No, 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 no.
yeah.
Right? They need time to prepare for that new role. So this is the conundrum. Just as he says, it's all about timing,
Hmm.
right? Have the conversations early enough. And guess what? You can have this conversation with Junior before Junior goes to college, right? But it needs to be a continual conversation because people's intentions may shift,
And
right?
rightfully so. That's
At,
okay.
right, but the business needs to be able to shift accordingly. So it's not that, oh, Junior said he wanted to run the business when he was 13 years old, so I'm going to lock him into this for life. No, maybe he might have liked tractors when he was 6 or 7 and he said he wanted to run the business, but come on. Maybe he discovered computers at the age of 14 and that's what he wants to do. So, you know, with families in business, so the most successful families in particular speak about the business consistently,
Hmm.
right? They speak about it around the dining table. So it's a natural part of business, right?
Right,
So it's nothing for them to have that continual conversation when it comes to the future of the business and what
right.
happens when it comes to the future of the business. So it doesn't need to be that big of a deal and that big of an event when it comes to speaking about succession. And I think this is a mindset change,
Hmm.
very similar to the way that most wealthy and successful families speak about money,
Hmm.
right? It needs to be an ongoing thing so that children growing up are very familiar with the environment,
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
And it
yeah,
doesn't need to be that much of a shock. So it doesn't need to be that everyone's holding their breath waiting for this conversation. It's
yeah.
more of a, you know, a flowing conversation that happens consistently over time.
Absolutely. You just said something right now. You said successful family talk
Yeah,
about money.
they do.
Can can you expand on that, please?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, the most successful families, and we've seen the research on this, and even in speaking with clients, it's quite normal for the if it's the parents, you know, around the
Mm,
table, it's about speaking, okay, well, this is a deal that we did. Okay, how does this work? Okay, this is a negotiation that we're going into. And the kids grow up understanding this interdynamic and this interplay when it comes to business. So it doesn't become a foreign thing to them that they then have to go, yes, of course, that some of the theory they do have to learn, but they learn via osmosis, I like to say, right? By hearing the conversations, by hearing what it's like when their parents need to negotiate for something, by hearing the outcomes of those conversations, those business conversations, right? So when it comes to the business, right? And in many of those cases, you know, things like, and you know, we're talking different classes here.
mm,
One of the things, when we do our successor due diligence, I find it shocking the number of successors, especially in the family business scenario, who don't even know they're being trained up and being they're being identified as a
mhm.
successor for this business, but they don't know everything that the business owns. So they
Right.
may have grown up knowing that the core business was a bakery, but they don't know how much real estate the family
Mm,
has amassed, right? So now, if you look at the contribution of real estate to the family's portfolio versus bakery, they recognize that real estate is accounting for 80% of their revenues versus, right? So it's things like these, conversations like these that successors need to be aware of. I like to call it this Simba moment, right?
right.
One of the questions I ask is, have you had your Simba moment?
Mm,
And this is, of course, referring to the animated series, The Lion King,
yeah,
where I think
yeah.
it was Mufasa who takes Simba up onto the rock and says, "This is everything that we own
Yes.
from you know, from east to west, you know, all the way down to the
And
horizon."
not to be mistaken, took him up so he could see it all.
So he can see it all. My
Yeah.
question to successors is, do you even know everything that you own? Do you even know everything that you will be taking over? Right? That's the first question. Because, of course, we then do work with them to figure out whether they have the skills to manage. If, for example, I told you, Mary, this used to be a bakery. We have this successor who's coming in. He thinks he's running a bakery. But when we look at the books, they're actually a real estate company. Well, guess what? Junior has no clue about anything when it comes to real estate. How effective is he going to be as a leader? Right? We need to identify whether this is a set of skills that Junior wants to improve on, or is Junior comfortable hiring someone with the skills to manage the real estate portfolio? But we can have a more informed and a broader conversation once we know, right, everything that is under the purview of the business, of the potential successor. And this is why I say having those conversations regularly means that it is not a shock to Junior stepping in and saying, oh, I didn't know that we also did this. You know,
I wonder sometimes if culture has a part to play in this also, where maybe some parents don't want their children to know the extent of their wealth. Do
in
you
many
see,
cases,
where I'm coming
yes.
from?
In many cases, yes, because in many cases, and the thinking behind this is, well, if they know how wealthy we are, then maybe they're just going to be lazy and they're going to sit back and expect that, oh, this or that, or maybe they'll be, stuck up or something like this.
Yeah.
Well, that's well and good, but at some point you need to manage how informed you want your child to be when it comes to managing this wealth. Are you taking the steps to ensure that they not only know, but know how to manage? So it is perhaps that you expose them to a little bit of it and expose them to and ensure that they're being trained on how to manage this little bit. And then you expose them to a little bit more and a little bit more, right? So it really is down to it, the whole thinking. What prevents parents from disclosing everything all at once is, for the reasons that we mentioned. But if they do it in a controlled manner and ensure that the child is being trained on how to manage this wealth, right, then then it tends to be a different scenario. But if you're just handing out allowances left, right, and center, and you're not training or teaching Junior how to protect
the wealth
and how to grow the wealth that they have, then it's you're essentially creating a monster.
Yeah, absolutely. And we really need to help them understand the value of a dollar. But of course, we also see that playing out where children are being spoiled, they're being driven to schools with limousine, but they have no clue. No clue at all how that money comes in.
Right. And the thing is, if you have your wealth, you've worked for it, it's no issue at all using it however you want to. But with the next generation, the onus is on the parents to ensure, or whoever the leader is, right, to ensure that the children are trained in how to manage that wealth. If it is that you expect them to manage the wealth.
Exactly.
If you expect them to just spend, then it's a completely different scenario and you can do as you wish. But
if you're spending and you're not teaching them how to make a dollar, then the chances are they will continue spending even after you're gone. And before we can say Jack Robinson, the business doesn't exist anymore. I mean, we see all sorts of stories everywhere.
And it's one thing, and this is one conundrum that many people don't understand, that they don't recognize. They look at some wealthy families and they say, oh, there's Johnny, his parents were rich, he must be really, really wealthy. Well, Johnny may have grown up rich. Let's say his dad made all of this money, and running his businesses successfully, and Johnny growing up was able to benefit from that. What you recognize is that what folks don't recognize is that generation after generation, a family expands, right? And as that family expands, the needs of a baby, I think we can all agree, are different from the needs of an adult.
Absolutely.
Right? So the amount that you would spend on a child, completely different from the amount that you would spend on an adult. And in many cases, folks look at folks who might have grown up wealthy and they may have said, well, you grew up wealthy, so certainly you have that money to spend. What they may not recognize is that the spending needs increase as the generations expand and as people become adults. So while there may have been a pot of millions when dad was in charge, all of the children are now adults, right? So their capacity to spend has ballooned, right? And now there are many, many more of them, many, many more mouths, right? So they may be wealthy in name and in external perception, but the amount of actual cash, let's say cash or assets that they have to each individual's name is, right, not as much, which is
Dwindling.
why it's really, really important that
Mhm.
children learn, as you were saying, Mary,
Yeah.
to earn this money and protect this money and grow this money.
Yeah, absolutely. But we have to create the right conditions for them. Like you said, you could be talking about your business to a 10-year-old, to a 13-year-old.
Yes,
It be an ongoing
yes,
conversation. It should be a conversation around the dining table, right?
yes.
And another mindset shift that we need is to stop holding on for so long. I mean, like you said, people get attached to their businesses. I mean, I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for 18 years. I call myself a lazy leader. I am so quick to let you know everything you need to do so I can step back. That
Yeah.
is me. But a lot of people get so attached to what they're doing. Like you said, they wait until the very last minute. And then all of a sudden, okay, I can't walk anymore. I haven't got the strength anymore. Oh, who is going to take over now? But by this time, you have low energy. You haven't
Yeah.
actually even got the time and capacity to actually do that transition properly.
Nope.
So, for our viewers watching, for anyone watching the replay, this is the real message here. If we're business owners, even if we're not business owners, even if we're working for large corporations, we must move away from that mindset where we feel threatened,
Yeah.
feeling, someone else is going to do the job better, or we're going to get found out, or whatever the case may be. We need to move away from that, because this is what I say to people. I mean, I remember about 15 years ago, I was in a huge capacity building exercise. And this particular organization hadn't been on any kind of training whatsoever. And one of the things I said to them was, it had a lot to do with changing mindset and helping the organization grow. And I said, you need to start thinking of helping this organization grow so that your children can at least come and apply to this organization. You could hear a pin drop in the hall. And after that exercise, someone came to, in fact, about two people came to me and said, that was powerful. That was a powerful statement you made there. So, what am I trying to say? Whether you are a leader right now, you're a manager, it's a family owned business, it's a government parastatal, think of 10 years from now, think of, 20 years from now. And this takes me to the story of the three stone cutters, where three men were cutting a stone. And one said, I'm cutting a stone for a living. Another one said, I'm the best stone cutter you will find in the city. And the third one says, I am building a cathedral. I am building a cathedral. Three people, three different mindsets, right?
Mhm.
So I would like us to be that third person. We are building a cathedral, whether it's a family-owned business, whether it's a government business, whether it's a big conglomerate. We are cathedral builders. We have to think of not just of now. We
Yeah.
have to think of the future. Rochelle, you have really, really made my day today. Great, great, great contributions there. So, what is your advice, final advice, especially SMEs, when it comes to attending to succession planning? That one last statement you want to give our audience?
Yes. Start early. Plan
Okay.
early. A plan is nothing if it's not documented and, more importantly, executed. But you need to start early.
Start early, document it. Okay, make it a
And
conversation around the dining table, right?
absolutely, absolutely.
Fantastic. And this is Rochelle's website address. Please, contact her on LinkedIn. Link up with her. As you can see, she's amazing. She's great at her craft. If you need her services, reach out to her. And I'm sure you can also read some of her posts on LinkedIn and learn a thing or two, from her. Rochelle, I cannot thank you enough for the time you have invested here today. Thank you so much. It's been great having you. And I hope to have you again sometime. How about that?
Mary, that would be great. Me and my team stand by ready to assist and support anyone who needs the help. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Thank you so much. See you some other time, Rochelle.
Yes,
Thank you.
take care.
Bye bye. And thank you so much to our audience. Thank you for always being here. And next Sunday, we are having a very different topic. I will be having Pradeepa, and we're going to be talking about infertility can suck less. Now, women, go through this, and being a professional woman, and to be going through that, she's going to come here and tell us our story and how we can own that space when we're going through such. So join us next Sunday as we host Pradeepa. So thank you all very much, as always, for joining us. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Bye bye.